We're going to go ahead and get started here. Again, thank you everyone for being here for South Carolina's Virtual Legislative Day. This is going to be the first of two events this year. This one's basically going to be an introductory event to the Legislative Day, what we're going to be trying to do, especially come March when the in-person one happens, and just a general overview of the government relations positions as well as the different advocacies that we have here. We have David Hawkins here who's going to be presenting as well with me. But first, we are going to get started here. There we go. Yeah. Just introductions here real quick. My name is Kyle Conrad. I'm an admissions counselor here at Winthrop University. I'm also the South Carolina Government Relations Chair for SACAC, which is the Southern Association of College Admissions Counselors. And what we deal with here is we deal with advocacy and everything for high school students as well as incoming college freshmen. So this is basically what I'm trying to get at here with the government relations. We are the Southern affiliate of the NACAC, which is the national organization of National Association for College Admissions Counselors. My big role here is just try to advocate for higher education for high schoolers. This is going to be, like I mentioned, a general overview of what we're going to be doing and trying to get people excited for the in-person event in March. That's going to be the one where we more or less go to the State House, are able to talk with state representatives and state senators, and advocate on upcoming legislations in the Assembly to really try to get our voices heard to better help the students that we are serving either in the high schools or in the college settings. So with that, I'm going to quickly turn it over to David. I know he has a lot to talk about, and I am also very excited to hear from him and what he has to say about the different advocacies here at SACAC and NACAC.
Thank you, Kyle, and thanks everyone for both for having me today and also for your commitment to advocacy. I always start every presentation out with a heaping dose of appreciation for what you all do. I have in the past volunteered to advocate in a number of capacities, but probably the most prominent example is serving as president of my kids' elementary school PTA for a couple of years. And I will tell you that often volunteer work can be thankless and can go unrecognized. So I want to make sure that right up front, I share my appreciation to all of you, particularly to those of you who are leading this effort, but to everyone for taking time out of your very busy schedules to advocate on behalf of the profession. So with that in hand, one of the things that I will do quickly is give you an overview of the presentation today, what we hope to accomplish, and also share a little bit about myself up front here. As you can see from this slide, I'm the Chief Education and Policy Officer at NACAC. I have been here for nearly 23 years now doing this work. And I started back in 2000 as the Director of Government Relations. So advocacy is very near and dear to my heart. It is still something I enjoy doing for the association, though my responsibility covers a lot more territory now than just advocacy. It was the first thing that I did for NACAC, and it's something I'm still very passionate about. So again, appreciate you advocating and appreciate you having me on today. So Kyle, I think we can go to the next slide. So what I hope to do today is provide you with a basic overview of the NACAC policy agenda. And I think the reason that this is helpful is that as you go to meet with elected officials at any level, whether it's school board, whether it's could even be institutional leadership like school principal or college president, so everything from institutional and local government all the way to federal government, it's just helpful to understand where NACAC is coming from and why. And I think oftentimes this gives us a good sense of why we would be advocating for or against a specific policy. Or if there aren't specific policies, it gives you a good opportunity to talk to elected officials about what we would like to see in the future. Which can then subsequently lead to policy conversations. And that's one thing I think is an important point to share right up front, is that sometimes you will go in and you will have an ask. You will have something very clear that you want the legislature to do. We want you to pass this bill. We want you to oppose this bill. But there are other times where you may not have something that's ready and on the table to talk about. And in those cases, it's okay to just talk about what you know. And I think that's what's so important about this. And so as we go through this policy agenda, I'd love to sort of touch base or share how this is connected to what we do every day, because you are the experts in your field, and that is something that members of elected bodies really appreciate and really need, because they're experts in really nothing other than the job of being a legislator. Now, obviously, with state legislators and local legislators, they often will have jobs. Maybe some of them do have expertise in this field, and that's great. But by and large, elected officials have to know a little bit about a lot of things, which means they know a lot about very few things. So as we go through this agenda, I will certainly be sure to draw the lines between the agenda itself and what we do as a profession. And I think it all kind of makes sense. So you'll probably see the connection just in walking through the priorities. So let's go to the next slide. We recently conducted actually an advocacy overhaul, which didn't necessarily change a lot about our advocacy, but one important change that it did make was that we really wanted to kind of clarify our policy agenda. And by clarify, what I mean is that there are a lot of issues when you're an organization that represents educators and stakeholders on both the K-12 and the higher ed levels. There are a lot of issues that you can find yourself involved in. And over the years, I noticed that while we had I think a very firm and a very clear policy base, we didn't really have a way to differentiate or elevate policies that were maybe more central to our core mission than other policies that might be important, but aren't necessarily where we are the experts and really no one else is. So one of the refinements we made to our policy agenda last year, and this will serve us into the future, is that we decided to set aside some issues where NACAC really is the authority on these topics, where our professional experience and our knowledge base gives us the unique ability to lead policy conversations about these issues. So this slide shows you where these three issues are. And I think that again, you'll see the connection to who we are as an association. So the first one is that we want to advocate in support of student and equity-centered admission practices. You may know or you may not know that NACAC was formed in 1937 as a way of ensuring that as colleges competed for students, that there were some common ethical principles, there were some common standards, so that the colleges wouldn't essentially chew up the students and spit them out at the end, right? That's a crass way of saying it. But over the years, our association has evolved to one that doesn't just include colleges, but also includes high school counselors and others who are stakeholders in this transition to college. And as we've evolved and as time has gone by, not only do we want to be student-centered, in other words, we don't want to forget the students' interest in all of this while we're busy thinking about our own interests. We also want to be equity-centered. And that's something that our board of directors and our leadership over the past few years has really elevated for us as an organization, is that we want to be focused on systemic efforts to improve equity. So as we, and I'll talk a little bit more about the issues that we deal with in this area in a minute, but the idea is that in our admissions advocacy, we really want to center students and equity in the policy conversations that we have. So that's the first priority. The second is professional responsibility and ethics for college admission counseling professionals. This is an area, again, that is core to NACAC's being, in that our founding purpose was to, in fact, establish a set of core principles that we could all live with. And while we have ceased enforcing that code of ethics that we created and cultivated over all those years, we continue to maintain that document as a best practices document. So moving forward, we will be advocating, actually we'll be doing three things. We'll be doing advocating, communicating, and educating people about those ethical principles and why they matter and why people should pay attention to them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. The third and final priority where NACAC leads is the expansion of capacity and impact of school counselors and college advisors. So right there, and I think you see that There are organizations out there that serve school counselors, like the American School Counselors Association and their state affiliates. We want to really be focused in on those areas that school counselors are responsible for in terms of advising students about their education beyond high school. Because ASCA really, we follow ASCA's lead on the school counseling role as a whole, but where they follow our lead is on the college advising part of their job. So we want to really focus on that. So those are the three areas where we're going to really invest in the coming years. We're going to invest in research, we're going to invest in education, and we're going to invest in advocacy to start to create proactive policy proposals that we can start to share with state and federal lawmakers to achieve our policy goals. So we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what this student and equity-centered admission priority means. I think that you see there the picture of the Supreme Court on this slide, and I think it's pretty easy to say that that's our biggest priority right now. We are very concerned, given the court's composition, that colleges' ability to adjust for the systemic inequities that lead to racial differences in enrollment will be severely limited in this decision that is coming down on the two cases that are before the Supreme Court currently. There is some based on oral arguments, we do have some. I guess there was some encouragement that the court seemed to understand that what comprises a student experience can't necessarily be separated from that student's race or ethnic identity, racial or ethnic identity. There were several justices on the court that seemed to really understand that, okay, right, well, a student might be part of a Black student organization in high school. Can you really separate that out? Can you say to a college, you can't consider that, when in fact you might have a student who was involved in the Daughters of the American Revolution and therefore highly likely to be white, right? And so the court seems aware that it's getting to a point of diminishing returns in its quest to sort of limit the consideration of race and ethnicity in admission. But by the same token, I think they are poised to try to put a sort of a final point on limits of colleges' ability to consider race as any factor in admission. So we're all waiting for the decision to come down, probably in June, and it's something that we'll want to be very active on. In fact, we do have a web page that's devoted to the Supreme Court and the resources that we've accumulated, and we will be rolling out more resources between now and the decision, and then of course once the decision is made. So beyond that, and certainly I'll be happy to take questions as we go through this, and then at the end as well. So if there's anything that comes up, just flag me down here. But the Supreme Court case draws a lot of attention, and we want to essentially say to the world that, number one, our pursuit of equity in post-secondary education will not stop. Like, this is not something that if the court rules in a certain way, we're not going to stop trying to make higher education more equitable. As a way of doing that, NACAC as an organization is looking to really expand the playing field of what we consider. And it's really something that we want to go beyond this idea that somehow just considering race when you're reading an application is the primary way that we can promote equity. And we all know that. We as professionals know that already, but the world at large may not know it, and we may need to do some advocacy around initiating new thinking and new practices. We issued a report last year with the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, where we provided recommendations for improving equity in college access. And we looked at everything from the application process to the composition of the admissions office to what we consider and why in the admission process. What's important to a college to see in the application process, and can we filter out everything else that's not so important to see? And then finally, we talked about the issue of selectivity and how we compensate for the fact that at some institutions, selectivity is somewhat at odds with equity. So we're starting new conversations, and we want to advocate for proactive measures to promote equity. And at the same time, we're worried that there could be legislation in both the state and the federal level that try to further sort of limit our ability to promote equity. So it's something that we have our eyes on very closely, and you'll see more from NACAC about in the near future. And I think I mentioned we wanted to develop research around this to make sure that what we're doing has a solid evidentiary base beneath it, so that we're not sort of playing fast and loose. But because you have the Supreme Court focused in, because there is the prospect of really perpetual litigation about this issue, we just want to be very careful that what we do has a solid rationale and a solid legally sound basis for implementation. So that's something we will also focus on in the future. So then we go to the next slide about ethics in college admission counseling. And here there are a couple things that I wanted to mention. We do see evidence that a lot of colleges are now doing things that would formerly have been restricted under our old enforceable code of ethics. Given the fact that we stopped enforcing this because of a Department of Justice investigation, means that we have to be very careful about whether that we have to stay on this side of the line of communicating best practices and not roll over into trying to enforce something, even if it is inadvertent on our part. But what we do hope to do is when issues arise, or preferably before issues arise, really educate and communicate what our best practices are and why they're there. So we want to educate our professionals, and we want to communicate with the world at large about why these things are in place. One good example of how our ethical practices can, if perhaps there was more education about it, perhaps we would have fewer challenges, is that recently and this is a graduate school example, but there are undergraduate schools as well. Graduate school at USC, Southern California, pardon me, had submitted false data to the U.S. News and World Report rankings. And while we have a whole other conversation about the rankings and the merits of the rankings, one of the provisions in our best practices document is that you should always report accurate data to any publicly available resource that asks, that you agree to submit it to, whether it's the government or a private publication. And so the risk, of course, is if you don't have NACAC to sort of encourage people that, or maybe you shouldn't have to have NACAC to encourage people not to falsify data, but with our sort of self-enforcement process, you used to have sort of a thin line that could kind of, colleges would know about and would understand that, okay, I could get in trouble with our professional association. Well, now that thin line is gone, but what remains is that the media can find out about these things much more easily. It gets in the hands of lawmakers and public policy types, and it gets into the legal sort of the litigation field very quickly. And so USC is now currently being sued by the National Student Defense Network as a nonprofit organization, and several former students for falsifying that data. So we encourage good practice so that things like that don't have to happen. Colleges have too few resources to begin with to worry about defending themselves against lawsuits when they've done something wrong. So it's something that we hope to encourage through our admission practices committees and our affiliate admission practices committees in the future. And then the second thing I would mention about this is that we will continue to advocate for policies that emphasize ethics in the college transition. And those of you who've followed the for-profit college journey over the last decade or more will be familiar with the fact that they have had some really, really bad recruiting practices sort of ingrained in the business model at many of their institutions. And we are constantly having to fight that fight on Capitol Hill and in the state legislatures, because there are, we have best practices about essentially that students are, first of all, to be centered in the process. So you want to do everything that you do with as much of the students' interests in mind as possible. These institutions are doing it the exact opposite way, where they are really factoring out the student. They see the student as a dollar sign, and they employ high pressure commission sales practices to try to get them in the door. So it's something that we want to pay very close attention to as we move forward, particularly now that there is a divided majority in Congress, with the Republicans controlling the House and the Democrats controlling the Senate, you have traditionally Republicans have been very sympathetic to the for-profit sector, Democrats not so much. So we will probably have to do a little bit of offense and defense, so to speak, on these issues to ensure that students are protected properly as we move forward. So we go to the next slide. And this one is perhaps the most obvious one, and the one that provides as much continuity as any of them, and that is that we want to support our school counselors and college advisors out there. Specifically, we want to reduce the student to counselor ratios nationally. This map it's just a few years old, but it probably hasn't changed all that much. Of South Carolina, you can see the red areas are where you have the highest student to counselor ratios, and then the green would be where you have the lowest. And so we certainly, our mantra here is that we want to hire, train, and equip school counselors. They are positioned to do one-on-one counseling with students, and we know that is important based on research that we've done. I think that gets to the second bullet, which is that we want to provide best practice information, and we really want to provide research to support the positive role that a school counselor can play in a student's transition to college. A few years ago, we did research using the high school longitudinal study out of the U.S. Department of Education, where we looked at a whole bunch of factors that contribute to students moving on to post-secondary education. And we found that regardless of any of the other qualities or characteristics that students brought to the table or experiences that students had, working with a school counselor one-on-one made it 7 times more likely that the student would fill out a FAFSA, made it 4 times more likely that a student would go to any form of post-secondary education, and twice as likely to go to a 4-year college. So with statistics like that, you can really emphasize that, providing that kind of good, close-in, one-on-one support is such a critical element of our post-secondary access agenda overall, as a nation, as a state, and as an association. And beyond just hiring people and making sure they're in place, we need to make sure they're equipped to do the job. I think you all know as well as we do that school counselors don't get a lot of time out of the building. They don't get a lot of opportunities to get professional development. And we want to make sure that first of all, public policymakers understand that needs to be provided in order for us to realize these gains. And that secondly, we can be in the business of helping shape what that education looks like so that we can base it on research and best practice. The other thing is that I think that as you look at these student to counselor ratios, you tend to sort of double back on the issue of student and equity-centered admission, because what you're dealing with student to counselor ratios is one of many symptoms of our inequitable K-12 funding strategy and support strategy. So you tend to find the most counselors in the most well-to-do places and the fewest counselors in the least well-to-do places. And so what we really feel like is that there needs to be a comprehensive investment in K-12 education, particularly for people who live in low-income communities and underserved areas. So those are our big 3. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see everything, well, almost everything that you might not have seen in those first 3. So this is where we support. These are areas where these are very, very important issues. In fact, the fact that I have college affordability on the very top, I mean, that is sort of the $60 million question that we need to solve as a policy community. But these issues are topics that we've been active on in the past, and we'll continue to be active on them in the future. But there are other organizations and coalitions that lead the work on this. And so we will contribute our experts and our voices to supporting college affordability measures, other protections against fraud and abuse. We'll support our undocumented students, global student mobility. I know that's a very important part of a lot of our college and university members' lives, a lot of our members who work overseas with students, and frankly, members who work here in the U.S. who have students who want to go study in a different country. We want to make sure we continue to support them. And then transfer pathways is something we've had quite a bit of work on in the past, and we want to make sure that we're supportive of that, because we also know that in our traditional member context, transfer students are becoming ever more important in the enrollment management process. And frankly, if we are serious again about achieving our post-secondary attainment goals as a community, as a country, we have to support our transfer students because they are the future of college attainment. So there are probably other issues that I didn't list there, but we would, take a position on. I'll note that we don't take a position on issues randomly. We very much try to align ourselves with what our board, our government relations community, and our founding policy agenda says that we should be in the business of working on. If there is an issue that is new, we do put it to our board. We do not do anything unless we have some explicit agreement that yes, we will advocate on this issue. Now, if something comes up and it's underneath one of these issues or one of the main issues that we talk about, and it's just a new wrinkle on an old issue, then oftentimes we will consult with our close-in advisors and think about a position that we can take. Or if it's obvious, if someone says we should eliminate all school counseling positions, that's easy enough for us to take a position on. We can jump on that one without having to consult the board. So that's an overview of our priorities, and I'll just go run quickly through the next slide and the series that really sort of pivots more now that you've seen kind of the topical basis upon which our policy advocacy rests. Now I want to give you a look at sort of the operational side of how we work. And whereas the topical side was introduced to kind of give you a background and like how it all fits together, this is an opportunity to see how it all sort of happens on the ground when we do advocacy, when our affiliates do advocacy, when we work in coalitions. And I think this slide is here because it's very rare that you ever do something in government relations and advocacy where you're not working with a whole bunch of other people. So I just want to give you a quick sense on the next slide about how many groups we work with. And I won't go through all of these, but you can see that, and there's more than just this. These are sort of our closest partners. And so moving from right to left, generally speaking, there's kind of a pattern. You see on the right, lots of individual professional associations. ASCA is there, ACRO, the Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, IECA and HECA, our independent educational consultant colleagues, ACCES, the colleges, the college advisors for private independent schools. So you can see, a lot of what we do, we have to make sure that we check in with our colleagues in those associations, because sometimes there's overlap, and at a minimum there's a linkage. So for instance, the financial aid administrators, we know that we're joined at the hip on campuses, so why would we not do the same here in Washington? And as you kind of move to your left, as you're looking at the screen, you'll start to see our coalitions. So the Student Aid Alliance is all the higher ed groups in Washington work to support student aid, the Pell Grant, Federal Work Study, and all the other student aid programs here federally. Project Thrive is a group of education organizations that represent professionals in the schools that are aligned with the Human Rights Campaign to oppose anti-LGBTQ legislation at the state and federal level. And several other of those logos, Committee of Education Funding, that literally is every education organization here in DC that we come together through this coalition to advocate for increased funding for education writ large at the federal level. So you can see there's so many different ways in which we connect to other groups. And I think that as you start out on your advocacy journey, it's not necessarily that you know all of this right away. The important thing is to know that there is support out there. So if you're working on a bill that deals with financial aid, you'll know you can go to your state financial aid association affiliate and probably have a likely ally in that group. And that's the thing, that as we start to progress through an advocacy process, we start thinking about who our friends are, and we pull from this community, and we might pull from even larger communities. For instance, in the Supreme Court cases, Fortune 500 companies filed amicus briefs in support of Harvard and UNC based on their need for a diverse workforce in the future. They are highly supportive of diversity in post-secondary education. So sometimes you have that linkage with the business community and other communities out there. So we always work as a group. It always takes a village. So it's something that we and it's something that we actually enjoy quite a bit, because there is strength in numbers. So we can go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the practical tools and resources that we can use, that you can draw on through NACAC. As I said earlier, you are the expert in policy conversations. And what I've seen a lot of people do when they've come to Washington in the past, they get really nervous about going and advocating with a member of Congress. And I always tell them, you know, you are not expected to know all of the ins and outs of legislative procedure. You know, you don't have to know how many votes it takes to invoke cloture on a bill. You don't have to know the specific process that a bill goes through, you know, in scoring by the Congressional Budget Office, right? Like that's for wonks like me and others who work in that system, right? What you are there to do is to tell your story. In fact, Senator Durbin from Illinois always tells us that the most powerful words in any advocacy pitch are "let me tell you a story." So that's 6 words. Now, there are some people who also want to see the data, and that's okay too. But the important starting point is that you have the story. And in particular, you know best what challenges you, your school, and your students face. And those are the stories that are going to capture legislators' attention. You don't necessarily even have to have the solutions to the problems. You really just have to know the problem or the opportunity, because with every challenge, there's an opportunity. So our role here at NACAC is to help you once you get someone's attention and once you're able to talk to them about your story. We're here to help you sort of take that next step. So we can move to the next slide, and I'll show you an example of how we do that. On the one hand, you know, if a bill comes up, like whether we wrote it or whether we were active in getting it to the floor, or whether it's just been introduced and a legislator has reached out and said, I really could use your support for this. We have the ability at NACAC to like post action alerts on bills. And these can be at the state or federal level. So we can create something that goes for or against, or it could even just be an informational email that we send. There doesn't even necessarily have to be a bill at stake. The idea is just that we have this system that we can use, and we can put the SACAC logo on there, and what it enables you to do is, if there's something that you really want to activate your community on, you can create this action alert and send it out to your affiliate membership and others, frankly, whoever you want to send it to write into your elected officials. And having talked with many staffers over the years, you know, these emails may not all be individually read, but they are all tallied. So as a staffer sort of looks over the types of messages that are coming in, they'll need to summarize for the elected official that, hey, we've got a whole bunch of messages on this bill in South Carolina from a bunch of educators. Like there seems to be something here. So that's the way in which action alerts can help. And frankly, they can engage people who may not be interested in, you know, walking over to the Capitol and advocating, or driving up to the capital city to do advocacy. They can do it right from their desks. Our system also allows us to do email petitions, social media campaigns. So as you all start to think about what you, as an organization, what you want to do from an advocacy standpoint, this is something we can help you with. We go to the next slide. Now, staying up to date. There's one, you know, once you have a conversation with the legislator, or if you're interested in getting plugged in, we have a lot of resources that can help, I hope. The NACAC Wonk on Twitter is the first thing. That's me. So I think the glasses kind of match. But the Wonk is a place where we'll often put the things that we're working on. We'll often place news articles that are relevant to our priorities, and also opportunities for you to get involved. So if you don't already follow it, go ahead and give it a follow, and you can sort of stay in touch with what we're doing here in DC. We also have a monthly legislative update that goes out to our affiliates. And basically, though, anyone can join it, and we're going to have a little bit more of a formal system here pretty soon with some new technologies that we'll get here at NACAC. But for now, if you're interested in seeing this monthly legislative update, just send me an email at that email address on the screen, and I'll be happy to add you to the list. That just gives you a sense of both federal, and I will include some state measures that come across my desk. Just to kind of keep everybody informed, and likewise, if you have something at the state level that you'd like other people to know about in other affiliates, let me know, and I'll be happy to put it in there. And then, of course, the traditional sort of sources. Our website has an advocacy section on it, so I'd encourage you to go and browse through that. And then we do put regular content into the NACAC Bulletin, which comes out every 2 weeks, and the Journal of College Admission, which is quarterly. So those are several places for you to get plugged in. Then we go to the next slide, which I think might be the last one. Yeah. So this is just my contact information again. I think one of the things that I'll say here in closing, and then toss it open to Q&A. We have had a lot of great experiences with our members advocating. And as you think about visiting your legislators, I was saying earlier, if there's nothing specific on the table, you can always just go in and say, hello, I am blank. I'm David Hawkins. I work at X school. And let me tell you a few things about some of our biggest challenges and some of our biggest successes. And then finally, I know that you have a lot of constituents that you need to serve. I can help you. You know, a lot of legislators like to do financial aid nights, college advising nights. You can offer to do something for the legislator if you're so inclined. You don't have to, but you can offer to help them with resources to help them and their constituents understand better the college admission process. You can also offer to be a resource for them legislatively, that if they ever have issues that come up and they need a college or a high school perspective, to give us a call. And likewise, the idea that you could potentially invite them over to your school, even to say, look, let me show you what kids go through these days in college admission and what we go through as the professionals that try to help them. So there are ways in which you can simply build a relationship with your legislator that can pay off. In fact, one such relationship that we saw here in DC was that our Pennsylvania affiliate went in and did just that, offered the college financial aid and admissions night. The House member here in DC took them up on it. They did the financial aid night, and then their legislative staff realized, I've got a resource here. So they started calling me and started calling the Pennsylvania affiliate when they needed help with bills. And so we started to develop a relationship with this staff. Well, the member eventually lost his reelection campaign, but those two staff members went on to progressively more important roles in the education infrastructure here in DC. One became a staff leader for higher education on the Senate Education Committee, and the other went to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as an education director. So, and in those capacities, they kept calling us back. So it's amazing how once you just develop a relationship, people understand, oh, I can call them and they'll know something. If they don't even have the answers, they can link me to somebody. So that's where I just come back to close on the point that I opened with, and that is that you're the expert in this. You are your job is simply to go in and talk about what you care about, and then it's their job to sort of take it from there and start thinking about, how does this work as a policy mechanism? Can we solve these problems? Can we help provide you the resources you need to do the job right? And as you go through that process, if they start asking you for things, then that's what you have me for, and your leadership in SACAC. You can ask us for the data or the information that you might have been asked for that you don't readily have, and that's where we'll swing into action. So with that in hand, I think I'll open it up to Q&A or anything else that you want to achieve here. A couple of comments. It's my pleasure to be here. I will note, last week I did one of these with Kentucky ACAC, and or no, wait, was it Megan? You might have been on this one. I don't remember. There was one where one of our counselors was going to speak before the school board that night, and we did this advocacy presentation. And I remember she said, "I didn't realize I could just go in and talk about me and like who I am and what I do." And I encouraged her. I said, "Oh, absolutely." In fact, one of the stories that I encountered, I went to this conference of state legislators probably 10 years ago now, and I was all hyped up to give a presentation about how school counselors were pivotal to college, transition success, and basically the data that I was running through earlier. And I'd gone through my, 10-minute opening, very passionate, case for school counselors. And this legislator raised his hand and said, "What do school counselors do anyway?" It's like, oh God. And so I talked about the various things. And one of the things I mentioned was that they help students complete the FAFSA. And another legislator's hand went up and said, "What's the FAFSA?" And I just, it's hard not to do a face palm when you're standing in front of people. You don't want to insult them, but it was just more evidence for the fact that sometimes we need to get really basic with our policymakers. They really we can't assume they know what we know, even on something as basic as the FAFSA or what a school counselor does. So.
Yeah, I know that when I met with a representative in my state a few years ago, he asked me, he's like, "Do I have any DACA students in my schools?" Just no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sometimes difficult to answer those questions. And that gives me an opportunity to say, it's perfectly acceptable to tell a legislator, "You know what, I'll get back to you on that." In fact, I was testifying before the Senate Education Committee back in 2010, and the chair asked me a question. He said, and it wasn't in my area of expertise. And so he just asked me, he said, "How many accrediting agencies are there?" And I said, "Sir, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll get back to you on that." And it felt awkward in the moment because the C-SPAN was on there. It was the one and only time I've ever been on TV, and so on live TV. And so in the moment, it felt like I needed to produce an answer, but it was pretty liberating to be able to say, "Let me get back to you on that." And I was able to get back to him relatively quickly after the hearing. It just in the moment just didn't. I just didn't know. So.
Yeah, and I've been to NACAC Hill Day quite a few times, and I've, participated in the state days, but I've had a lot reach back out to me, which, to your point, just offering to do things for them and to help be a resource for them. I had one just this year reach out to me about giving them a tour of campus, just as simple as that. So it does happen.
Yeah, and those are really powerful, Megan. It's just the storytelling is just so important. And like I said earlier, some people are going to want the data, but even they understand the story. They need to hear the story in order to really appreciate the data as well. So Kyle, I guess I'll toss it back over to you if there's no other questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. Very informative. I even learned very much that I wasn't fully aware of yet. So I really appreciate that. And it's basically going to bring me to my last slide here real quick. It's just a basically save the date, mark your calendar for our in-person legislative day here in South Carolina. It is going to be on March 14th. The Hammond School in Columbia is graciously hosting us for the event. There's going to be a short programming before that. And then afterwards, we're going to try to get you guys to be able to meet with our state representatives and state senators in Columbia after and during the sessions and everything. So the registration link for that event will be sent out very soon. So that's something you're interested in, please sign up for it. It will be a lot of fun and very informative. And like David said, don't be afraid to talk to these people. They are, at the end of the day, they do technically work for you. And they're also just people like me and you. They aren't any different, and they do want to talk. They do like listening to us. I've had many conversations with legislators in the past. And once you get past those nerves, there's some really good and great conversations that can be had with these legislators. So there's nothing to be afraid of. And if something you're just even interested in a little bit of doing, I would recommend really jumping on the boat and really going forward and doing it, because it will be a lot of fun and really broaden your horizons as well. So if there are any more questions, now would be the time. Throw them in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask. But then if not, you guys, it was a great time here. I learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. And if you have any questions for me afterwards or want to get involved with SAC GovRel, just questions about that as well. My email address is on the screen. You can always reach out to me as well.
Thanks, Kyle and David.
Thank you for having me. And thanks everybody again for advocating.
Thank you again, Dave, for coming on. Like I said, it was very informative and very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, for facilitating this. And thank you so much, David, for providing all of this excellent information. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. Take care, everybody.